Good morning and welcome to the Orlando City Council's budget workshop for 2024. Today is July 15th, 2024. And thanks to the commitment and professionalism of our city team members, City of Orlando is able to provide the highest level of critical municipal services, programs, and amenities that our residents, businesses, and visitors rely on every single day. And I'm grateful for our staff and also proud of the way they serve our city in a fiscally responsible way. This morning, the Office of Business and Financial Services will outline a proposed budget for this next fiscal year designed to continue to positively impact the quality of life of those here in Orlando, while also planning for the future. Because of our strong financial management, we're able to do this without raising the millage rate for the 11th consecutive year. The proposed budget will allow us to add 24 new police officers, 39 new fire department first responders, with many of those expected to work in the growing southeast portion of our city. We're also recognizing the need to expand mobility options in our region by investing in Sunrail so that our residents and visitors both have means other than roadways to make their way through our community. This discussion will also cover future plans to issue bonds for critical city infrastructure, such as fire stations, parks, road networks in the southeast area, as well as funding for streets and stormwater infrastructure improvements to limit flooding. So, are you ready, Michelle? Our Chief Financial Officer, Michelle McCrimmon, with her first budget.
Good morning, everyone.
As CFO.
Good morning, Mayor. Thank you, and Commissioners. I'm sure you feel the buzz in the air right now, budget workshop day, right? We started the budget cycle feeling cautiously optimistic about fiscal year 25. We asked the departments for flat budgets, but acknowledging that there's pricing increases and expansion of services for our growth. And so we asked the departments to submit flat budgets, but to justify any requests for increased expenditures. We continue to see pricing increases with our vendors, and we also still have challenges with supply chain issues, especially in construction. And then departments are still running into challenges with recruiting and retention of employees. And we saw that recently with the increase in police salaries of 6% to help them with their recruiting efforts. As the mayor mentioned, this year our Sunrail obligation came to fruition as well, and we've got some significant future needs, especially in our southeast area with, as the mayor said, roads, parks, public safety, as well as stormwater. But like last year, you're going to hear that our revenues for fiscal year 25 have grown. That's allowed us to propose a budget to you with additional staffing, especially in public safety, a budget that allows us to meet our operational needs, our capital needs, and plan for those future debt obligations to help us to continue to invest in core city services. So from a 30,000-foot level on the revenue side, as the mayor mentioned, we're proposing no increase in millage. Our property taxes did go up 5.2%, and we'll go into that in a little bit. Our revenues from OUC also increased by 7%, and then our sales taxes also increased by 8%. And then we've got some other fee increases that are being contemplated. Due to operational cost increases, solid waste and water reclamation have proposed rate increases, and then you all approved the stormwater assessment increases earlier this year. Our salaries and benefits expense is our largest line item, especially in the general fund. It's about 61% of our total general fund budget. And that reflects 4% pay increases, which is the last year of our collective bargaining agreement. And then we also have the additional 6% pay increase for police to help them with their recruiting efforts. That's baked in. Comparing this year's budget to last year's approved budget, we've added 132 positions. So when you see prior year numbers within this budget presentation, it's really the budget that was passed last September. We know that mid-year there's modifications and additional positions and adjustments made to the budget, but just for apples to apples comparison, we compare the budget that we're proposing to what was approved last September. So when we talk about additional positions, I've tried to delineate between what's been approved already mid-year 24 and then what's included in this new fiscal year 25 budget. So of those 132 new positions, 109 are in the general fund. And of those 109 in the general fund, 39 were added mid-year and 70 have been requested through this fiscal 25 process. And about 70% of those general fund positions added are public safety related. While historically we've managed to keep our healthcare costs down compared to market, due to overall rising healthcare costs, especially with prescription drugs, our increase for the new year is 11%, which is really 8% overall increase, and then we've got the impact of these new positions being added, so it's 11%. And then we also saw significant increases in the police and fire pension plans, primarily from the investment losses from fiscal year '22. On the operating and capital side, as mentioned earlier, Orlando is responsible for contributing its share of the Sunrail costs. For fiscal year '25, it's 9 months worth of costs, so it's about $14.2 million. Orlando has about a third of the cost of the Sunrail system. We've also included some additional debt service payments in our budget for anticipated bond issuances, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But today's agenda item actually includes a declaration of official intent for one of those bond issuances, which allows us to pay for costs now and get reimbursed later with those bond proceeds. And then our capital funding from the general fund to the capital improvement fund has decreased, but it's really getting us back to our pre-fiscal year '24 level. Fiscal year '24 was kind of an all-time high for capital project funding. On another positive note, we continue to maintain our strong fund balance. So fund balances are kind of like our savings account. And as a reminder, to calculate that percentage of the fund balance, you take those dollars that are in our fund balance or savings account, you divide that by the next year's budget. And so as your budget grows, you also have to add dollars to your fund balance as well. So we're always mindful of that when putting together our budgets. And it's not only fiscally responsible to have a strong fund balance, but it also helps us with our high bond ratings, which helps to get us some competitive interest rates in the market when we go out to borrow. And then I always mention to you all too, during years of natural disaster, if we need to spend monies to clean up, we have those dollars in our fund balance while we're waiting for FEMA reimbursement to come in. So that's another great reason to have that, and we appreciate your support of our strong fund balance. I'm going to spend most of the time talking through the general fund. I'll highlight some of the other significant funds, but just at a high level, this is our fiscal year all funds budget is $1.82 billion, and this is a breakdown of between all the different types of funds. You'll see about 2/3 of the city's budget is made up of the general fund and the enterprise funds. And then this is just a breakdown, again, of our all funds budget by revenues and by expenses. The revenue by source is pretty consistent with last year, and we'll cover most of the significant changes in the budget within the presentation. So as I mentioned before, since almost 40% of our budget is the general fund, and this is where most of our critical city services are funded, we'll focus primarily on the general fund. The proposed general fund budget totals just under $708 million, which is a 7.3% increase over fiscal year '24. And the next few slides will go through some of the significant changes. Property taxes. Based on the preliminary property tax roll, they've increased $16.8 million or 5.2% over last year, and it represents about 49% of our general fund revenues. By comparison, last year we saw increases of 14%. Prior to that was 13%. Fiscal year '22 was 4%. '21 was 10%. Fiscal year '20 was 9.5%. Fiscal year '19 was 11%. So we've had a lot of, double-digit increases in the past few years in property taxes. And we know about, we don't have a complete set of data to analyze, but we know that of the 5% increase, about half of it is from new construction. And then that's just a quick reminder that basically only about a third of somebody's property tax bill is for city services. Total payments from OUC are broken out between a franchise fee equivalent and a dividend payment, and has increased about 7.8% and 7.3%. And payments from OUC are about 16% of our general fund revenues. When you look at the chart, it looks like the jump from fiscal year 20 to 25 is pretty significant, but you can see a drop down during fiscal year 21 and 22. The payments were reduced in response to OUC's reduced demand from COVID. And so really the payments are now catching up with their growth and their return to normal operations. And then just a reminder that the dividend payment we get from OUC is the franchise fee is built into their budget, and the dividend fee is after they make all of their operating payments, all of their debt payments, all of their capital payments, and is really the last thing they pay to us. So there's no adverse impact to making this dividend payment to the city. Sales tax is another significant revenue for us, 8%, and it's by far our most economically sensitive revenue source. We've increased the sales tax budget this year by about 7.8%, and you can see the blue line there is our budgeted amounts, and the red is actuals. So we've been really conservative the last few years because of its sensitivity. But our actuals have been, much higher than what we've projected. So we're trying to better align our budget without being overly aggressive, but better align our estimates with what we think is going to come in. Fiscal year 24, we know, is ahead of schedule or ahead of budget, and we've also used that as a funding source for the 6% police pay increases that went into effect this year. And then charges for services, that's the last revenue line I'll go through, and that's about 8%. The green items are kind of internal charges, so those are cost allocation plan and enterprise dividend charges. So those are kind of charges amongst different funds and a revenue source to the general fund. You can see it bump up in the EMS fees, and that's for a MCO payment that's been budgeted this year that we didn't have last year, which is additional reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid for transport services. And then our department fees are pretty consistent with last year. So because we have a balanced budget, general fund expenses have also increased by $48 million and 7.3%. And then the next few slides, we'll look at expenses by department, and we'll get into some more details. And then this is the same expenses, but it's just broken out by departments, and it's in order of dollar change. And so you can see that we had some significant increases in the budget for police, transportation, and fire, and then only one department, non-department, decreased, with everybody else increasing. And then just another breakdown by department, percentage-wise, of how the general fund breaks out. Most of the percentages are pretty consistent, other than the departments that increased, police, fire, transportation, those have bumped up some, and non-departmental has gone down. And then we always talk about this, but this chart just demonstrates our commitment to public safety, and that even with the increase of almost $17 million in property taxes, the cost of public safety still exceeds that revenue. And so with the additional positions added in police and fire, in this year's budget, the gap doubled from $20 million in fiscal year 24 to $40 million in fiscal year 25. In other words, our property tax revenue is $40 million this year less than the cost of police and fire department costs in the general fund. So the next several slides are basically all of our department slides, and I'll just kind of navigate you to how this is set up. So the top left notes the department. The top right, we've got the general fund budget, and then the all funds budget with the percentage increase or decrease. On the far left in the white, the top left is all of the different divisions or offices within the general fund that's included in that general fund budget. And then the other operating funds are the other funds that roll up into kind of that all funds budget. And then on the right side, we've identified just some highlights, some key highlights of changes within the budgets, both on the general fund and then on the other operating funds. So if we, excuse me, start with police, their budget increased by about $22.6 million. 46 positions were added since last year's budget. 17 were approved mid-year and 29 in the fiscal year 25 budget, 26 of those positions being sworn positions. Transportation increased by $15.2 million, with the lion's share being the Sunrail costs of $14.2 million for the financial support that begins January 1st. The fire department's budget increased by $14.5 million. 42 positions have been added since last year's budget. 2 were approved mid-year and 40 in this fiscal year 25 budget. And those 40 positions include 16 firefighters at the Sunbridge Temporary Fire Station and 13 firefighters to staff the hazmat heavy rescue, 1 fire prevention inspector, and then 10 civilian paramedic positions. Families, Parks, and Recreation's budget increased by $3.3 million. 13 positions were added mid-year. And we've got additional budget of almost $500,000 for ball field maintenance contracts and facilities funding added to their budget. One item of note that you'll see on there is at the end of fiscal year 24, the Blue Meridian Grant and Accelerate Orlando funding will run out. Those were not general fund supported programs. Total costs were about $3.3 million for those. They requested for the general fund to be able to pick those dollars up, but we weren't able to fully fund that $3.3 million. We were able to program $1.5 million. And so Families, Parks, and Recreation are still working through how to program those dollars into what they need for next year. So you'll probably see some changes in the budget that we proposed to you in September. Excuse me. Office of Business and Financial Services budget increased by about $2.2 million. The big story there, just higher IT contracts of almost $2 million. Economic development increased by $675,000. Most of that increase were from positions, but also about $400,000 increased for board ups and maintenance for code enforcement. HR, Human Resources increased just over $500,000, with about $400,000 due to increased funding for pre-employment testing and background checks. We're increasing our number of employees and increasing the level of activity in their office, so they just needed some additional funding for that. Public Works increased by about $400,000. Again, that's just the general fund piece. If you look in the all funds, you'll see that their all funds budget jumps up significantly, and that's because most of the largest departments are within Public Works, but they're in other funds outside of the general fund: water reclamation, solid waste, stormwater, and so we'll talk about some of those funds later. And their increase was primarily increased trail path maintenance of about $650,000, and then it was offset by a decrease in some funding for a truck that wasn't in this year's current budget. Housing's budget increased by just over $200,000. And you'll see, just like Public Works, if you look in the all funds, you see a much higher all funds budget, and that's because most of their activity is with federal and state grant programs. And so just a small portion of housing staff and programs are funded by the general fund. And a big reason for that is a lot of the funds that a lot of the grants that they get, there's an administrative cost within those grants. And so they're able to use that to pay for their staff time. And so the increase in funding in the general fund this year is to reinstate funding for a housing coordinator position. But we also needed to add some budget of $121,000 for administrative costs, because our SHIP funding allocation was reduced by about $1.2 million. So we needed to help them replace those admin dollars from that loss of the SHIP funds. And the executive offices increased by just $114,000. I always like to point out the divisions within executive offices, because I think when people hear executive offices, they think it's just the mayor and commissioner's offices, and there's so much more that's included in there. And items of note, there were 3 positions added mid-year, as well as increased support for Greenwood Cemetery and the communications special events budget. But then it was offset by a decrease of just over $500,000 in an election expenses, since fiscal year 25's a non-election year. And then ironically, the only department that decreased is our non-department. And so that went down by about $11.7 million. Of note, this is where our contingency fund is. So we've slightly increased it from 13 million to 13.5 million. So that's what's included in this year's budget. Some increases in this budget. We've got about almost $5 million for future anticipated bond issues. And then we've also got a reserve of about $4 million for some contingent public safety and personnel costs in there as well. And then our decreases are transfers to the capital funds, capital projects fund. I mentioned that that's a little bit lower this year, so it lowered by about $10 million to kind of get us to that pre-fiscal year 24 level. And we'll talk about the capital project funding in the next few slides. We also had a decrease in the transfer of the designated revenue of about $5 million. And we had decreases in transfers to the downtown CRA and Republic Drive CRA of about $3.7 million. The downtown payment to the downtown CRA went down about $1.5 million. They saw a 5% decrease in their property taxes this year. And then our Republic Drive CRA is actually going to be ending this year. We'll make our last debt payment. And so because of some reserves that we can use to make the final debt payment, that also resulted in a reduction in what we needed to pay them, which helped us out. And then I'll also point out the non-department general fund budget includes almost $1.4 million, which is actually an increase of about $272,000 towards rental assistance and Housing First initiatives. And then, of course, city staff and housing, homelessness, and economic development continue to work on the affordable housing projects that are in the Accelerate Orlando project as well. And then our friends at venues, while they don't have any general funded programs, we did want to make sure and include them. You can see their all funds budget of $52 million. And then we've got some general fund highlights of some costs that we programmed within their capital. Citywide staffing, you can see the trend of increases in city staffing as our population has grown. And so the proposed budget also includes 4,116 employees now. And when you look at employees per 1,000 residents, you can see that we're getting back to that kind of 12.3, 12.4 level that we saw in earlier years. And when you break it down by first responders per 1,000 residents, you can see that our police first responders have ticked up over the last couple of years and are maintaining. And our fire first responders are pretty much staying about the same as well. And then as we build new fire stations in the southeast area, that's going to, of course, impact the number of first responders in that ratio. So just to highlight a few other funds that have had significant changes or items of note, I won't go through every line item, but I'll just kind of mention a few things that I didn't already bring up. If you look at the third line item, which is a stormwater utility fund, the fiscal year 25 budget is $8.4 million higher than the prior year and also reflects those increases in the stormwater assessments. And so with that increase, they were able to fund 8 additional positions, 1 mid-year and 7 in this fiscal 25 budget. And then their capital outlay and contractual services budget increased by about $1.2 million, so they can purchase a dump truck and a sweeper, and also increase their fountain repairs and maintenance budget too. And so after, and then they also had about $1.3 million in higher debt service for the anticipated bond issue. And then after those operational costs, they basically had a remaining about $4 million to transfer to capital, which isn't sufficient for them to do the capital program that they need, which is why they're in need of some bond proceeds this year. The venues line item, which is just under stormwater, you can see an increase in their budget, and that's a reflection of their strong event schedule. The Community Redevelopment Agency Fund, or CRA, which is just about halfway down that, you can see a slight increase of $1.6 million. They've got a one-time use of about $4 million in fund balance to fund projects, and then that's offset by about $2.5 million in revenue decrease from their 5% property taxes decrease this year. And then water reclamation down at the bottom, that's their capital fund. You can see that decreased by about $14 million, and that's primarily due to a one-time use of fund balance last year. But their capital funding reflects a proposed bond funding of about $140 million. And so the next few slides, what we tried to do was really align and bring you awareness, and we did this last year as well, of kind of the number of community centers, parks, sidewalks, vehicles, lakes, et cetera, that we maintain to continue to provide municipal services. And so we've tried to align our capital funding to all of those different infrastructure assets to demonstrate our investment in that core infrastructure. So while everything listed there isn't 100% of the capital program, all of that will be in the budget and brief and your commissioner notebooks, but it represents a good portion of our total capital program that we're proposing this year. So I won't go through each line item on here, but I'll just kind of highlight a few things. If you look under the 20 neighborhood centers, that $514,000 that's listed there for fishing pier and boat dock repairs, we found in working with Families Parks and Recreation that they were having to use a lot of their facility dollars to help repair some of those piers and docks. And so we decided to, start having a designated funding source for those so that we can, they can really prioritize which ones need to be fixed and really be methodical about handling that without having to take away from their facility maintenance dollars. And then an item of note on here too, we've expanded, you can see the second bullet item, the building envelope maintenance. This is formerly our roof replacement program. And so we found that, there's city buildings that have, windows that are in disrepair that need repairs or replacement, and painting as well. And so this is another funding source that we can use to really prioritize those particular locations and make sure that we've got dedicated funding for those necessary maintenance items. And then, we continue to fund our sidewalk repairs and mediation, as well as pavement rehab with a combination of gas tax and then also general fund dollars. And then water reclamation and stormwater, they've got pay-go, meaning just paying with their existing budget projects, but then they also both have upcoming anticipated bond issuances to help them kickstart their capital programs. And then public safety, we work with police and fire. We know that they've constantly got radio replacements or equipment replacements that they need to implement. And so rather than, having these ups and downs where maybe one year they've got a big capital replacement and not the next year, we've funded things kind of trying to work with them to come up with an even funding source so that we can make sure we have the dollars whenever they need to do some of their large dollar replacements. And you can see under fire, we've got the temporary fire station for the Sunbridge annexation of $1.75 million. And then the fire apparatuses, there was a agenda item sometime last year or the year before, where we had to go ahead and start ordering those fire apparatuses for the southeast fire stations because there's such a long lead time. So we wanted to make sure and get the order in, but then also have the funding in place as well. So this is the final funding component for those apparatuses. And then CRA has a large capital program for Lake Eola Master Plan, the canopy design, and then downtown maintenance and safety. And then we've got some IT funding, of course, our $500,000 for affordable housing, and then parking's got a nice R&R program planned. And so this is just a overview of our capital improvement program by fund. Some additional areas to highlight that I haven't mentioned before: the transportation impact fee and park impact fee funds. You see some big decreases there. That's down towards the bottom of the schedule there. And that's primarily because they used some prior year, or they used some fund balance in last year's budget that they didn't have this year. So that's why you see a decrease in those funds. The impact fee funds, most of the time you're building those up, and then once you've got the funding in place, then you're drawing on that fund balance. So that's what they did last year. And then the stormwater capital, that's decreased by 18 million. And so, as I mentioned before, even after their rate increase, there wasn't enough operating revenue to fund a transfer to the capital fund beyond that $4 million. And so that's why you see a decrease there. And so we'll be filling that up with bond proceeds to help them increase their capital fund program. And then this is just a view by function of our capital improvement program. Vast majority is water reclamation, economic development, which is primarily CRA, and transportation, and that's about 80% of our total capital program. And so I've mentioned it a couple of times during the presentation about future bond issuance that we'll be likely bringing to you for your approval. The first is water reclamation, which is around $140 million. Last year at this time, you all had approved a declaration of official intent to allow them to go ahead and start spending on capital projects. And so we're about ready to get going on that. That project list is being finalized, but it's got lift stations and improvements to their facilities included on that list. And we're still working out that timing, but it's going to likely be this fall for that issuance. And then we've got another likely issuance in our covenant program. The declaration of official intents on today's agenda, allowing no more than $200 million to be spent, but we're still determining what that dollar amount is. And we're also still finalizing that project list. But we know our obligations that we have, especially in the southeast area with fire stations, roads, and parks. And then, of course, we know we've got the stormwater projects as well to include. And timing is kind of TBD on that as well. But it's likely, maybe Q2, Q3 of fiscal year 25. But we did, to be conservative, make sure that, any of the operating departments that will be involved in repaying this debt service have included that within their budget to be conservative. And then as we look out to beyond fiscal year 25, today we're presenting to you a balanced budget. It's a really strong budget with a lot of great items in there. We know there's some future commitments to be mindful of as we look beyond this next fiscal year. We know we've got a continued obligation for our portion of Sunrail. We've got to staff our new fire stations that we ultimately will be building. We know our bargaining agreements expire September 30th, 2025. And we have continued pressure on increases in the pension and benefit costs as well. And so just to further demonstrate the impact of personnel costs on the general fund, this just shows personnel costs are, and I mentioned this before, about 61% of our general fund. And when you break out that personnel costs, the sworn positions are almost at 61% as well, with the civilian positions being at 39%. And so really, the purpose of that is just to bring in awareness of our future commitments to be mindful of beyond fiscal year '25. So we presented to you a balanced budget of over $707 million for the general fund and over $1.1 billion in other funds, giving us a total overall city budget of over $1.8 billion. So this is tentative. There could be some changes, refinements between now and the budget that we present to you in September for your vote. Our next steps, we've got our budget and brief and commissioner notebooks that will be distributed and posted on our website within this week, or within a week. We've got briefings with each of you already scheduled on your calendar, so we can go through questions and more details. But of course, I'm happy to answer questions today. But before we do that, on behalf of the budget team, I just want to thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for your support. I also want to thank the budget team, led by our Deputy CFO, Martin Carmody, and his team, Jason Wojciewicz, Anthony Belizio, Nicole Novak, and Chris Mendoza. Go ahead and wave. I want to thank the city's fiscal managers, the division managers, and department directors for their budget requests and their prudent management. I get to stand up here and present this beautifully balanced budget, but there's a lot of work. Martin would say blood, sweat, and tears, maybe, that goes into this budget process. And so I just want to thank everybody for their hard work, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Michelle, and I also want to, at this point, thank the financial staff and then all the fiscal managers for each of the departments that have worked with staff. So Michelle's able to encapsulate this in 30 minutes, what has required, I don't know, I was going to say hundreds of hours of work, but it's probably more like thousands of hours of work. And we still have a lot to do over the summer, obviously. We'll get your budget books and go line by line in detail through those for our scheduled hearings in September.
Yep.
So with that, I will look for questions, and we have in the queue first Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Sheehan and then Commissioner Stewart.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. And Michelle, thank you for your presentation and congratulations on your first presentation. Also, thank you to your team, Mark, and the whole budget team. I did ask this question, I believe, in the past when we were looking at the proposed budget versus we're doing a comparison of the proposed budget versus the approved budget for last year. And for my information, I think it's important or could be good information to share where we are with the actuals. I know we haven't completed the year, but I believe maybe 9 months and then project the next 3 months. So when we get to the commissioner briefings, that's something, if possible, I would like to have included. So, we can see, one thing comparing budget to budget, but we really need to be looking at what do we actually spend this year and what we're budgeting for the
Sure.
upcoming year.
Sure.
And I do know that I think on a quarterly basis that type of analysis is done, but I just don't have all of that right here in front of me. So if that could be provided. But again, thank you for your work in this, and I look forward to us moving forward in our next fiscal year. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thanks, Mayor and Michelle. Great job. I know this is a challenging year. The increases weren't as high as we thought they were going to be, and you had Sunrail, which was, and how you balanced is amazing. Kudos to the staff here, conservative forecasting, because that was just great work. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'm glad to see Greenwood finally funded. We never took care of Greenwood, and I'm glad to see that we're finally doing that. I noticed that the SHIP funds were down 32%. Is that because we got more state funding?
I think that was just a decrease.
It's less state funding.
Yeah, it's less state funding.
It's less state funding, so that's less state funding that we have to match. Is that what
Yes.
happened? Okay, and I just wanted to point that out because, the state just keeps short. There's a lot of state funding available to build affordable housing and help people. And they keep cutting it and cutting it and cutting it. I think it's very important to point that out because they're doing the wrong thing, and we step up where we can, but we can't do it all with affordable housing. But I'm distressed to see that because they said that they were going to be giving us more and they're not, which is wrong. Something I also noticed was the emergency generators in the budget. You know, I'd like to see us to go to solar battery backup, just because I know how amazing it is and how well it works, and then we don't have to worry about all the maintenance and everything that comes with generators. So I know as we're looking at those expenditures, it might be good to look at that, because I'm definitely a proponent, because I'm someone who lives it, and I know how efficient it is. And I'm also glad to see with stormwater that we're making up the shortfalls. I know, you know, Corey, we had to go through that whole exercise, but the bottom line is that is infrastructure that if it doesn't work, you know it's failed and it's a problem. So I'm glad to see that we're finally getting you whole on that, and I just want to say good work to everybody. I know it's hard. You know, we have less revenue coming in as building has gone down, and you all have done a great job to make sure we have a balanced budget. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart?
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor. And Michelle, congratulations on your first official budget.
Thank you.
Although you've done a great deal more. The whole hardest thing about trying to do the budget is trying to consolidate the budget into a presentation. So I appreciate the work.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to talking with you individually when we get some of those details. One of the couple of questions which I think it just always confuses me, just for what it's worth. Back on your individual department analysis, back on like page 22, general fund highlights that you have for the police department. I get confused. It says added 46 new positions. You mean that you've added 46 in the new budget? Is that what you mean? Under the highlights? I mean, that's spending in the budget, not added from the previous year, correct?
So when we talk about since our starting point is really that approved budget from September, even when you're adding positions in 24 mid-year, that's really adding to that budget that was previously approved. So that's kind of why we delineate, we show both the mid-year and what's been added or what's been requested for just this particular
this
budget.
represents really what, if approved, what will be added to our expenses. I mean,
Yes.
added as new personnel.
Yes.
The word added compared to the previous year is always confusing me, so.
Okay,
So,
understood. We'll look at that.
And I
Thank
think
you.
probably the other thing that confused, when I look at it, and I think you did a good job, but I couldn't catch it all. Under the budget, you have general funds and all funds. So I think that it's a little clearer on some of the other departments about the difference, like in housing, that they're controlling 14.8 funds, but the $14.8 million in funds, but they have like 1.3 or $1.4 million in terms of actual expenses. That makes a little bit more sense. I think on these other areas, I think the same kind of thing applies here. So
Okay.
I always am, and I appreciate the graph that you did about the general ad valorem taxes and comparing that actually to public safety. And because oftentimes people will equate, they're paying taxes, they want better public safety, and I agree with all that. But they don't realize the intricacies of the budget and how it ends up reflecting just this portion of it. So essentially, their ad valorem taxes doesn't really even cover public safety. We have to go
Right.
get other money someplace else to accomplish that task.
Right.
And so that's why we work so hard for it.
Yep.
Your sales projections, or sales tax projections, is really interesting. I'm always uncomfortable. I mean, you budget revenue low and you budget expenses high. But when you look at the forecast of what's coming out in the course of the next year or two, I think it's probably going to at least maintain the same level, if you would assume. I mean, do you agree that is it artificially low?
Yeah, I think if you kind of look at, and it's a little bit hard to tell with the red there, but you can see that we're still, even if it maintained where it's at right now,
You're comfortable
even
with
next
that?
year's budget is going to be below that amount. So we're still, we're raising our projections a little bit, but we're still not getting overly aggressive with it, because we know that the sensitivity to this line item, and it's significant to the general fund too.
The other is the reserve fund. I mean, we've always tried to get to that 25%. And sometimes we've been over and we've had additional money to be able to use for capital projects.
Yep.
It looks, I think it's 23.8% is where we are. Is our intent to still kind of replenish that to 25 or I think 23.8 is comfortable, don't get me wrong, but we always have kind of said that maximum limit of 25.
Yeah, I think this year we're hoping to be roughly the same. Now, depending on how we finish this fiscal year, if we've got some extra dollars to add to the, and you all are in approval of that, we could certainly, use those dollars to add to our fund balance. So that could be an option, but it's likely we're gonna, roughly about stay the same.
What's often is we budget the 25 and then, but in practicality, we don't get there because of our expenses are less, whatever else it may occur. And I understand that, and we ought to be in that high level
Yeah.
area.
And some of the FEMA reimbursements come into play as well, because sometimes there's such a delay in when those dollars are spent and when they come back from FEMA, so we have a little bit of fluctuation from that activity as well that can come into play.
And the last question is that on the debt service that we're looking at, the one today and then coming in the future, those expenses for the debt services are included in this budget, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the assumption is that we've approved them and we've already got that service here.
Yes, we didn't want to be in a position where we come to you asking for that and then we have to scramble and figure out how are we going to pay for this debt service. So yes,
Yeah, good. Well, congratulations to you and your team.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Martin, official congratulations to you on your promotion. Appreciate the work that you guys have done and continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gray.
Thank you, Mayor. Michelle, thanks to you and your team. A couple of quick questions that just kind of jumped out at me. Page 21, slide 42, the pavement budget of $6.5 million. I just know that's woefully short, and we're short on that every single year. And each year we talk about addressing that, and it doesn't seem like we've done it. So I know this is the first pass, but I'm going to pound on that one pretty hard because there's no way in the city $6.5 million will rehab our streets. Just it won't work, and it hasn't each year. Page 23, slide 46. You started to explain the decreases in some of those funds, the park impact fee, the capital improvements. Would you repeat that again? I didn't hear you or didn't quite understand you. What is that again?
Sure. So last year, those funds used fund balance to budget some projects. So when you think about impact fees, where dollars are added, and so the balance is growing, and then at some point, you've identified projects that you can use that funding for, and so you use that fund balance, so to speak, to draw those balances down. And so that's what happened last year, was that some of those balances were spent on projects, whereas now the balances are lower, so we don't have that same kind of activity happening. You don't have that same spend down of their fund balance this year as we did last year.
Okay. May need some more explanation on that, but
Yeah, and we can get you more details on what those projects were
Yeah.
in our briefings.
okay. And then on page 25, slide 50, thank you for pointing out some future budget considerations. And the four there are legit, but we have to continue to look at public works. I think we found that the last time with the huge increase in stormwater fees. Justified, but we waited, in my opinion, too long to do that. And I think the public rightfully just misunderstood why we were doing it. We just waited too long. We understand why we didn't want to increase the fees, but I think it had a backlash. I think we have to continue to look at public works. As we grow as a city, public works is going to continue to be a big source of funding for us. And it's a consideration if we don't continue to look at funding that.
Yep.
So thank you very much, and there'll be more questions
Great.
down
Yep.
the road. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, fair point. That was primarily focused on the general fund, but I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Michelle. Great presentation. A few questions. Let me ask you, on this budget, are we considering the new annexations to the city?
Yes, sir.
All of them?
We have the temporary fire station. We've got fire personnel for that temporary fire station. And then we've also increased our police personnel in the South Patrol as well. that will be in that area.
So we're accounting also for what we're bringing in.
Oh, the revenues. We anticipate that our dollars do include, it's a little bit hard to digest some of the property tax information, but we do expect that those dollars are included in our property tax numbers, or if they're not today, they will be in the final numbers we get.
All right, we'll talk about that further.
Yep.
Thank you. Page 10, slide number 20. The property tax at 338 million that we get, does that include the CRA?
No. Sorry, which,
All right, that was a quick question there.
okay.
So there was a decrease on the CRA also, you mentioned 5%.
Yes, sir. Mhm.
Is that any particular reason we lost some buildings or something going on? Is this something that is affecting the whole city or is it just the CRA?
No, our city property taxes went up 5% and CRA went down 5%. We did talk to the property appraiser's office, and they attributed that to, and Commissioner Gray, you would know this better than anyone, but really the multifamily housing, and because of the cost increases going up, even though they may be full and rents are going up, but because of the higher cost pressures, that was impacting the valuation of those particular properties.
It's funny because we have more buildings now, so it's a little weird. Okay,
I agree.
moving on. So page 23, slide 45, we have a 4 million for downtown maintenance and safety. From that 4 million, about how much of that is towards maintenance? Do we have any idea, and how much is going into safety?
Oh, the CRA $4 million. I don't know if we have that breakdown. We can get that for our briefing with you. We can get you some more details on what that is.
And last, page 24, slide 47, capital improvement program by function. I see that we have a general government 5.85 or 5,085,000. What is that for? It says general government.
That should be, what would you?
It tends to be central things like
IT facilities.
sort of soft things, not facilities.
Okay.
but sort of soft investments, if you will.
Okay. So if you couldn't hear Martin, he was saying that's kind of the soft investments, so like IT costs and things like that. But we can certainly get a breakdown for you.
Thank you, guys. Great presentation.
Trying to trick me up today, Commissioner.
And Commissioner Ortiz, I didn't understand the decrease in the CRA either. I thought the housing prices would have went up. Commissioner
Yes.
Gray and the office would have been down, but who am I to know that? Okay, Commissioner Rose?
Good morning. Great presentation. Few concerns that I have. The Orlando Kids Zones have been serving a lot of District 5, 6, and kind of concerned about the shortage because of the grants, and just want to make sure when we do brief, get a better understanding of where those gaps come from. Is it going to be staffing? Is it going to be programming? As we see, the numbers are down with violent crime, so that means that our programs are working, our youth are attending services. I just want to know how that will impact the community. When we do brief, I'd like a better understanding of Sunrail. This is the 9 months, but overall, what are we looking at projecting and how Sunrail will impact our budget over the next several years? Some concerns with SHIP, and I guess I would like a better understanding of how the decrease impacts housing, as we know we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and just want to know where those numbers are shifting. We want to make sure we serve our community. Homelessness is really out of control. Obviously, District 5 is impacted the most with the services in the Paramore community. And so I want to make sure that our residents are being served and that the surrounding businesses and residents are not being negatively impacted by the increase, and figuring out how we're doing that. As well as with this decrease, how will housing adjust? And I guess that's a larger conversation with the new homeless ordinance that's taking place, obviously with the SCOTUS making the decision that we will have to enforce the homeless ordinance. How will that impact our housing numbers and how we adjust that? obviously our roads we have to work on our roads and our streets, so Public Works is great seeing some of the improvements. I would like to see for CRA a better understanding of the canopy breakdown. Originally, back 10 years ago when this was a proposed project, it was a split with FDOT, and I just want to know how it has evolved through the years. And would also like a breakdown and better understanding of the downtown maintenance and safety, seeing that the CRA budget has decreased because of property taxes. And I guess all of us would like a better understanding, and so maybe we can get the comptroller or the property appraiser in to give a briefing or a breakdown how that works, and understanding we are increasing buildings, but just overall. But that's it. Thank you. You guys did a great job.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to increase our briefing time with you, Commissioner. But we'll work closely with the departments, because there's a lot of, we can handle the funding side of it, but obviously there's some operational and programming questions that you have, and so we'll work with the departments to make sure that it makes sense for us to discuss with that, or if it needs to be a separate briefing with them as well. But thank you. Great questions.
Okay, again, Michelle and staff, thank you for the many hard hours that have gone in, but the many more that are to come between now and September. Thank you, City Commissioners, for your insight, and I know that you'll dig deeper into the budget over the course of the next couple of months. And then thank you to the almost 4,000 employees that we have that work so hard every day to make sure that we have the best municipal services in the whole state of Florida. So with that, we'll see you in September.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Stand adjourned.